following is a Comfortably Zoned Radio Network production.
We are back, in case you're wondering, with George Case. I'm Ralph Tycho with the Comfortably Zoned Radio Network. The man himself is here to introduce the crew. George Case.
Oh, thank you, Ralph. It's going to be a pleasure today. We're going to be talking about Babe Ruth. And, most everybody knows certainly the legend of Babe Ruth, but we're going to get into some detail about his life and the new book that's been out by called The Big Fella. And our guest tonight is going to give a review of that book, and I'm looking forward to hearing his comments. Some of our panelists, our regulars, Alan Blumkin. Alan is in the Pittsburgh area, a well-respected baseball person who's got a tremendous, almost an encyclopedia of knowledge of baseball history. Ronnie Rabinovitz in Minnesota. Ronnie is certainly a Brooklyn Dodgers fan, but has knowledge of the, New York baseball, and of course that's where Babe achieved some of his highest amount of stardom was with the Yankees. And David Hubler, who wrote the book, The Nats and the Grays. David and I was able to help David with some information for his book. David's in the D.C. area, and, we're going to have quite a discussion. We're calling this really another hot stove leg discussion, and part of it's going to be about, the life and times of Babe Ruth and James Levy's book, The Big Fella. So, Ralph, with that, I'll turn it over to you, and we can get started.
1 second, George. I live in Brooklyn. I went to college in Pittsburgh, but that's a lot of years ago.
Okay, well,
I have a lot of contacts with several of the Facebook groups I'm in with a lot of people live out there.
Yeah, well, I always associate you with Pittsburgh.
With Pittsburgh, yeah,
Alan. So, right, okay.
All right, just want to set the record straight.
No problem.
Okay.
One of the advantages of this particular episode about the Babe is we have two Yankee fans, long-time Yankee fans. David Hubler and Al Blumkin are both here, and Babe preceded both of you guys, naturally.
Yes, he did.
Yeah.
Happy to say.
He preceded all of us, Ralph.
Right.
Really, all of us probably put together.
Right.
However, Yankee lore is built around Babe Ruth. Yankee Stadium, the house that Ruth built. And there's almost something magical about, you mentioned his name. I happen to have posted a really good video that somebody had recorded. I got it off the internet, so one of the sites, recording Babe's physical athletic ability like I had never seen. This guy could whip a 44-ounce bat around like it was a twig, and his throwing of course he was a pitcher, in his position playing days, he played right field. He was a pretty good right fielder with an incredibly strong arm and fluid. He could, I noticed on this film, the rotation of his hips, which is so important in hitting a ball, was incredible. For a big guy, this guy could get around. And so in conclusion of my rant, I want to start with David Hubler. And David, if you would, just some of your thought, if you can go back to being a kid in your mind, some of your thoughts about Babe Ruth when you went to Yankee Stadium, how he was presented by the product New York Yankees.
Well, of course, he was dead by the time I went to my first Yankees game. However, I distinctly remember being kept out of school the day that his funeral, because his funeral, he's buried up in Westchester County, and the entourage went right up Jerome Avenue from the stadium, and my mother kept me out of school to stand on the corner and watch the cortege go by. I distinctly remember that, and so it's so ingrained in my family. My parents, I think I've told this story, how my parents had friends in an apartment building where one of Babe's women lived, and the Babe used to show up periodically in his big coat, that he wore, and that sort of
camel coat.
Yeah, right. That's right. Thank you. And his big Packard twin six car, and he would go in for a couple of hours, probably to discuss the world events, and then
that's what he was doing, David. You're right.
Sure. And then he would leave, and everybody used to hang out the windows, who had apartments in the front, because they could watch the Babe go in and come out. So, yeah. So those are my two Babe Ruth stories. I did meet the man once. I was at an Orioles game. I did meet this. We were sitting in. They'd given us press tickets, but the press tickets there was this overhang where photographers used to sit, and that's where they sat us. And there was an older gentleman next to me, and he was the photographer on the field that took that famous picture of Babe's back with the number 3 on it, I think everybody has seen that photo.
Right.
That was his last appearance. That was in 48.
Yep.
His last appearance at Yankee Stadium. Yep.
Yeah, and this photographer, I forget his name, took that picture, and he told me a couple of stories, right? How much fun it was to be with Babe Ruth.
Good memories, David. Alan.
Ralph, let me interrupt for a second and tell you got another person. I've been sitting here for a while, but I got in a little bit late.
We're expecting you, Steve Goldleaf. How are you?
I'm just fine. I'm sorry to not get in on the intros.
Good. I am happy to have you, as George mentioned. First of all, you've been on Comfortably Zoned before, and you made a terrific guest. We've talked for well over a year about the possibility of you having a podcast on this network. And so why don't you introduce yourself to the members of the panel? We have Al Blumpkin here, David Hubler, of course, George Case III, Ronnie Rabinovich of Jackie Robinson fame is here. And we just, on most Sunday, they call it Sunday afternoon. It's Sunday morning. It's all relative. I'm in California. It's still morning. But we have Hot Stove League Baseball. And we thought, because we were going to discuss Babe, you just did a review of Jane Levy's book. And why don't you chat a little bit?
Sure. Well, the thing that I wrote about Levy's biography of Ruth was I wrote this on Bill James' online site, was a total rave. I mean, it was one of the most magnificent biographies that I've read in a while, and the astonishing part to me was that it was a biography of somebody who we all think we know very well, all the stories, all the legends of Ruth's life, and Levy managed to capture it in a remarkable, fresh, effective way. And I think the thing that she did that really captured that was totally new to me was all the stories that she told about Ruth barnstorming around the world with Lou Gehrig in the 20s. And that was, just amazing because she got to tell about the things that we're all familiar with, but from a totally different perspectives. She got to tell them from Ruth being interviewed while traveling on a barnstorming train, and in one of these stories, Gehrig was actually driving the locomotive. And it just created a whole new picture of Ruth that tied it all in together in a way that I hadn't seen done before.
Steve, this is George K. Steve, I just wanted to mention one thing. You talk about in the review, and I haven't read the book yet. I've read some excerpts, but you mentioned this barnstorming tour, and that really hits home with me because it talks about the first stop of the barnstorming tour in 27 was Trenton, New Jersey. And that's where my dad played. I lived right across the river. I played at the same ballpark where they had the game at Wetzel Field in Trenton. I knew all about coming down on the train and Christy Walsh and all he did to promote, and he was I guess the ghostwriter and also the agent for Babe and Gehrig and the Bustin' Babes and the Larrapin Loos. I mean, that was Trenton, New Jersey was the first stop. And what I read was, factual. I've read the newspaper columns in Trenton after the event. Babe hit 2 or 3 home runs, and kids were crawling around and hanging on to him, and it was quite an event. So, I read that, and I know your review. I'm sure you talk about it because I have a picture of Christy Walsh in the 1939 World's Fair. He was the director of the Academy of Sport. And I never knew who he was. He was standing there with his hand on the shoulder of my father, who was one of the speakers at one of the days at the Academy of Sport. I had no idea who Christy Walsh was until I started to learn more about him, and he was quite a personality himself. So I appreciate your comments about Jane's book, and I know that she discussed, Christy Walsh in that barnstorming tour to some extent.
Walsh was quite a character. He did enough jobs for Ruth that he'd probably today be a whole staff of people. But, he was really at the infancy of the PR game and the agenting game and all that. So he just did it all himself. It was really an invention of a whole new, different line of work.
I think that Jane, really talked about that. It's amazing when you see he was way ahead of his time, Christy Walsh was, because he pretty much, invented, the whole genre of athletes as personalities and all their endorsements and the money that they made, off the playing field. He was way ahead of his time. And, what Jane talks about, he obviously getting into Babe Ruth's life, but what the notoriety of Babe, as you point out, really was spectacular, and a lot of that had to do with the way Christy Walsh managed Babe's life.
Yeah, well, the first agent that ever appeared on a negotiating table.
Right.
They wouldn't literally let him in the room, but he sort of tried to coach Ruth in how to do that, and that was probably one of the things he was the least successful at, was disciplining Ruth how to respond. The Yankees try to lowball him in one way or another, so I think the Yankees came out a little bit ahead on that.
Right.
Okay. Alan Blumpkin, you read some reviews of the book. Would you talk?
I don't have it yet, but and I was a little. I've been a little reluctant because I've read the first baseball book I ever read when I was like 8 years old was a biography of Babe Ruth by a sports writer named Tom Meany.
I remember Tom Meany.
Which the book was, very light on, heavy detail. But this is the first one I ever read, and I think he's the greatest player to ever play baseball. And every time his birthday comes up or Jackie Robinson's birthday comes up, I put down that I feel that Babe Ruth and Jackie Robinson were the most significant people as players in the 20th century.
Right.
And the more I hear about the book, a friend of mine is about halfway through it. One of my friends in Pittsburgh wrote a raving review on it on Amazon, and what Steve is relating and everybody on the panel is relating, I'm probably going to read it fairly soon. I like the book on books on Koufax and Mantle. In fact, my brother, who never reads a book at all, the only book he's read in the last 20 years was her biography of Mickey Mantle.
That made me laugh in certain places about poor Mick's demons, but how he was such a fun drunk. No other way of putting it. I wonder if any other author captured Mickey in the way she did. There were some stories that he told apologizing, did Mickey to a woman in front of a group of people, and his version of an apology was absolutely fall down funny as hell. So that's what occurs to me about Jane Levy. I can't wait to read the book. Just so, and maybe Steve can answer the question for me, overall, everybody in relationships go, husband, wife, teammate, boss, employee, they go through ups and downs. Overall, would you say Babe and Lou got along?
Oh, that's an interesting question. The received legend is they didn't get along at all, and that Gehrig was jealous of Ruth's renown, and that there was no love lost between the two of them. And apparently they were supposed to have had a big falling out over some conflict having to do with their wives. But in the stories that Jane tells, and this is mostly the two of them barnstorming, they were, teammates. They really got along. Ruth couldn't have done these barnstorming tours without Gehrig along to play with them. It would have been just, a lopsided game. Whichever side Ruth was on would have dominated. So Ruth really needed Gehrig to help him out in this, what I call a branding extravaganza. Ruth did more to voice the idea of himself as the central figure in baseball during the off season than he did during the on season. And Gehrig was there helping him out, and incidentally, getting paid very handsomely for that. And I think in these barnstorming tours, certainly there's very little conflict between them, and they play against each other in both senses of that term. Literally competing on the field, but also just contrasting in personalities for the fans to enjoy the barnstorming tours.
Yeah, as an aside, I don't know if anybody knows this, but he and Bob Musial went barnstorming after 1921. And at that time, there was a rule that players on the teams that participated in the World Series could not barnstorm. So Landis called Ruth and Musial in, and he not only fined them, he suspended both of them for the first 30 games of the 1922 season. And that was the last year in the Polo Grounds, and Ruth, who had two monster years in the Polo Grounds in 1920 and 21, had an off year in 1922, basically because of the suspension. And of course, by 1927, that restriction was gone.
Now, Alan, let me ask you something. Steve, maybe you know. I had only heard that Judge Landis, after the 27 barnstorming tour, said no more barnstorming tours by Ruth and Gehrig. Now, is that true? I don't know. We keep talking about, because 27 was such a huge year for the Yankees and that barnstorming tour, but I'm not sure that it happened after that with Judge Landis's ruling whether they weren't allowed to do it anymore.
I can't. I don't know anything about that.
Well, no, that's what I was told. I don't know either. I just have mentioned that because that was what I had heard Whether it was true or not, I don't know. But, the fact is that legendary 27 tour is what everybody talks about. And, of course, later on, different aspects of it, and then Feller and Satchel and Dizzy Dean, they did their barnstorming tour back in the 40s, but that was much later than after that 27 tour.
Well, the first time I read about the tour after 1921, which resulted in the usual when Ruth getting suspended, I was shocked. I thought that, I don't know why they did that, and I thought it was a very, very stupid rule.
Right.
Well, that lowered my opinion of Landis somewhat. Of course, this is before all this, all the stuff came out about him being a big racist.
Right, he was. Yeah.
Well, what I was going to add to that was just that one of the points that Levy makes in her book is that this is really a power play that, up until that point, Landis was seen as a very authoritarian figure who would just lay down the law and that would be it. And Ruth decided in his own contrary way to say, well, wait a second, this is going to cost me money? Hell with that. I'm going to play anyway and, let him do his worst. And so, Ruth got to do that 21 barnstorming tour, even though, Landis apparently punished him and punished Musil for it. But, Ruth was asserting his defiance of Landis's authority, and I don't know if Landis ended up winning that. I would say that Ruth ended up winning that power struggle.
I think you're right.
Yeah. He probably made more money on that barnstorming trip than he lost in the 30 days he was suspended. And it was bad for baseball not having him in. Doing stuff like that reminds me of Bowie Kuhn suspending Mantle and Mays because they were greeters in Atlantic City or in Vegas or whatever. You cut your nose off to spite your face. And there are a number of commissioners that have done that over the years. They don't cut their own noses off, but they cut baseball's noses off.
Well, first thing that Tagliabue did when he got into the office of commissioner was lift the restrictions on Mays and Mantle.
Right. We don't remember much about him as a commissioner other than that. That was a biggie.
No, it wasn't Tagliabue. It was the guy who ran the Olympics.
Uberoth.
Oh, okay.
Uberoth,
Yes.
right. Oh, thank you. I'm sorry I blew that one, but...
No problem. I mean, that I happened to meet him a couple times, Uberoth, and, Alan, I think all the commissioners, with the exception of, I guess Giamatti. I mean, Giamatti was loved by the players and the owners and all that, but the fact is that a lot of the commissioners, they like to be their own power, and they're going to do what they want and think what they think, and it's one of those things. I agree about Uberoth though, lifting the ban, and Ralph, you mentioned. I mean, to me, it was ridiculous with Mays and Mantle. I mean, and I think they were greeters at Atlantic City, I think.
Well, the owners got rid of Happy Chandler in 1951 because they thought he was favoring the players.
Yep, you're absolutely right. They did. Yep.
Yeah.
And as a matter of fact, nothing more. The owner before, I blank on it, before the commissioner before this guy, Bud Selig, was an owner.
Yes, he was. Milwaukee.
And they asked him to give up his ownership, and he turned the team over to his daughter.
Right.
And if you think that bringing Milwaukee back into the National League didn't show favoritism, I don't know what how you can. So he got away with that, and he'll always go down to me as a guy who cancels the World Series. Are you kidding? David, your whole book was based on wartime baseball, keeping the World Series alive.
keeping the game alive, not just the World Series, keeping the season going.
Yeah, right. But they were able to keep the World Series going through the war, and this guy cancels it. I may have asked you this before. Did that absolutely appall you? Was that something that
Are you talking to me? Are you talking to me?
Yeah, specifically.
Yeah, it did appall me. I mean, there are people like myself and George and our whole panel, I guess, who think of baseball as sacrosanct. I know Hal Bach does too, and just to toy around with it. You know, we went through the scab thing with the NFL and things like that, but baseball goes on. I mean, so that was just a terrible, terrible interruption. And it just screwed up everything as far as I was concerned. I didn't lose faith in the game, but I lost faith in the people who run the game.
Right. Good. Well put. Well put. Ronnie Rabinovitz.
Yes, sir.
There was a rumor all through my childhood that Babe Ruth was a man of color. Did you ever hear anybody on the panel ever hear that? And especially you, because you're such a Jackie Robinson aficionado.
I had not heard that, no. I had not heard that, no.
Oh, yeah, I had heard that, yes. Oh.
Yeah, I had heard it. I had heard it. And, you know, I think as sometimes you hear that kind of stuff, and whether or not it was true or not, but, it made interesting reading, but you know, I don't know whether how far back it goes. I mean, maybe it did back in, the teens or way before that, before Babe Ruth even was born, maybe. I mean, he was a product of Baltimore, and his father was a bartender, and Babe, worked at the bar with his father, and then I guess his mother and father split up. Babe winds up in in that industrial home, and is a catcher, and I've seen pictures of him, and he was everything. I mean, he was a natural ball player. He was, whether or not his roots were African American or whatever, I have absolutely no idea. But I had heard that story. You're absolutely right, Ralph.
Yeah, it's an ugly story. I never put much stock in it.
I had never heard that.
One of the things that Jane Levy debunks really thoroughly is the whole genealogy, because one of the things that she's able to show, in addition, of course, showing that famous, the only photograph really of Ruth and his father together in the
behind
bar.
The bar? Yeah.
You can see in their faces how closely related they are, but just happened to be unfortunate that he had features, a broad nose and somewhat thick lips and dark coloring that let people make those rumors spread. But what Levy does that's really interesting is she goes through it in a very scholarly way. She literally traces his ancestry all the way back to Germany on both sides of the family. So there's almost no possibility of there, being any, black part in Ruth's heritage. And, of course, the only place that would come in would be through his father. And you can, as I said, plainly see in that picture, they look like twins.
Yeah, they do. That picture is one that sticks out in my mind, Steve. I guess they were standing at the bar.
Yes, yeah, I remember, and that's true. I mean, they looked so much alike. It was, it was remarkable.
Right.
Okay. Steve, may I ask you if there was anything in reading Jane's book, not your first rodeo, you know baseball, been around baseball, what surprised you? What did you really learn for the first time from Jane's book?
Well, it was one of the books that, could only really have been written in the 21st century, in that a lot of the tales, particularly of Ruth's early years, were so out of keeping, even with Ruth's own telling of his early story. In other words, Ruth, I think, started his first supposed autobiography that was ghostwritten, I think, by Bob Considine in 1935. But the first line of that first autobiography is, "I was a bad boy." So, Ruth always had that reputation. But Levy really goes into the fine details of what growing up in a really, rough neighborhood in Baltimore, turn of the century, is like. And she tells some things about Ruth's parents' divorce, for example. Details, I'm talking about really fine details of Ruth's mother's infidelity that, are virtually unpublishable before we get to, recent times, just because it was both in language and the most seamless you can possibly imagine. Mm-hmm. So that sort of stuff really jumped out at me, and I said, wow, this is a whole new retelling of a story that I thought I knew.
Hey, let me skip back for a second. You know what amazed me when you said that his roots, the babe, go back to Germany? Lou Gehrig was of German descent as well.
Yes, he was.
Well, Ruth and Gehrig apparently spoke to each other in German. How's that for a picture that you don't really feature?
No, that's an interesting detail. Yeah.
Right. Right, absolutely.
Yeah.
The other thing about that, you talk about that, we were talking about how Ruth and Gehrig got along. You're talking about a guy who went to an Ivy League college and a guy who, I don't even know if he graduated from high school. So there was an intellectual gap there too, between them. And it's like when they talk about Yogi Berra reading comic books on the trains and planes. There was an intellectual gap between Ruth and Gehrig that I'm sure showed up periodically. Maybe Ruth, might have been somewhat jealous of Gehrig's education and his lack thereof.
Or his relationship with his mother. Gehrig had a very, very strange, complicated relationship with his mom. And maybe...
In what respect, Ralph?
Pardon me?
In what respect? A strange relationship with his mom.
Yeah, right.
There's a book out that by Tony Castro called Gehrig and the Babe, it's mostly about the whole relationship between the two. I read it several months ago. Gehrig's mother was very, very overprotective.
Yes, yeah.
He lost a couple of children early, and when Lou survived, from birth, she was extremely devoted to him.
Overprotected,
Very protective. The father was not in the picture very much.
Yeah, he was a quiet guy.
Yeah.
No decisions. The mother was...
very domineering.
Very domineering. So...
very interesting.
Yeah, very, very interesting indeed.
The book is worth getting. By Tony Castro. It's not very expensive.
Now, I think, and I might be wrong, but on Lou Gehrig Appreciation Day, I think that Babe and Lou, reconciled, and I've seen the picture of Babe, giving Lou a big hug and all that stuff. So, whatever happened before, and that's what I'd heard too. It was, a problem with Lou and Babe, and what Babe had said about Lou's mother, or what Lou's mother said about Babe, or something like that. And that really set Lou and Babe on a crash course, and they never really spoke or got along until that day in '39 when Lou Gehrig said goodbye to baseball.
Yeah. I must say, my mother, every time that comes up, my mother attended that game in 1939.
Right.
Came from upstate New York a little bit, Mount Kisco, and took the train to Yankee Stadium. So,
while we're talking, Ralph and Steve and Alan on here, you were talking about Babe, and I think one of the facts that maybe a lot of people don't realize is that Babe did not finish up his baseball career in New York. he wound up actually his playing career. And Alan, you were, being a Pittsburgh guy, he hit 3 home runs at Ford Field.
And the last one was completely out of the ballpark.
Yeah, right. And, that was 7, 12, 13, and 14. And then like 2 days later, he retired. He played his last game at Baker Bowl in Philadelphia. And that was
the
it.
thing is, though, he left the Yankees because he was slowing down quite a bit, and he wanted to manage them. And they offered him a managerial job in the
minor league
farm system, and he wouldn't take it. And his ambition was to be a manager. The standard response was, how can you manage a team when you can't manage yourself?
Right. Yep.
So, the Yankees were not about to get rid of Joe McCarthy at that point. So they let Babe go, and the Braves offered him one of the worst franchises in the majors at that point, offered him a job, supposed to be titled as a general manager or something like that. And that's why he went there. And then later on he went to the Dodgers as a coach. He's hired by McPhail, and he and DeRocha never got along. Because he thought DeRocha stole his watch from the clubhouse after a game, and that didn't last very long.
Well, let me just add one little anecdote that Jane Levy tells in her biography that I think adds a little bit of color to this, that Ruth was actually offered the job of playing manager in the winter between the 33 and 34 season. And this is from the Detroit Tigers. But Ruth was on one of these barnstorming tours. He was playing a game in Hawaii at the time, and he wrote to Frank Navin, the Tigers owner, that he'll negotiate when he comes back to the States in a week or two. But between the time Ruth got the offer and the time Ruth came back, Navin offered the job to Mickey Cochran, who took it, and Ruth never got another offer to manage a big league club again. So the thing I took from that anecdote, which I'd never heard before at all, was...
I'd never heard that either. Yeah,
I thought it was kind of an eye-opener. But what I took from it was that Ruth, in a way, foiled himself, because he, was so eager to do all of these barnstorming tours that sometimes took him, halfway around the world, that cost him, the thing that he probably wanted most in the world during the latter part of his career, which is a job managing a big league ball club. And the Tigers were a great big league ball club in those days.
Yeah, they sure were.
I have to say...
Did I lose you guys?
Movies. When Ruth hit those 3 home runs in what was apparently his last game, in the movie, the John Goodman biography, each time Ruth hit a home run, because he was so slow or slowing down, whatever the reason was, they had him run to first base, where a pinch runner would meet him and run the other 3 bases around to score the home run. And it happens 3 times in the movie. And one of the cardinal rules of baseball is once you leave the game, you're out of the game. You don't come back.
David, I didn't see the movie, but to me that's a Hollywood touch. That's ridiculous.
It's more than a Hollywood touch, or it's less than a Hollywood.
How you replace a runner?
No, I mean it's one of the standard rules of the game. Basketball players can come back, football players can come back, soccer players can come back, hockey. Just ignore this in their attempt to do a portrayal of Ruth. I thought was practically criminal. I don't think anyone should have paid to see that movie.
Babe Ruth has a record of most bad movies made about a ball.
Probably so. Probably.
I agree. I agree with both you guys about the Babe Ruth baseball movies. They're horrible.
The first time I ever saw the Bendix movie.
Yeah, the William Bendix. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Right.
My jaw, I was dropping lower every 5 minutes. Then there was one with Nathan Lane, which I think they had Pete Rose playing Ty Cobb,
Really? I never saw that one.
No, that didn't last very long. It was made for TV. It didn't make the theaters. It was made for TV.
Oh.
I saw it. It was horrible.
Guess I missed that one too.
Yeah.
Because if you made a real movie of him, it would have been X-rated.
Hey, how many of you guys, when you see William Bendix, all you can think of is what a revolting development.
Yeah, The Life of Riley, yeah.
The Life of Riley, right.
Yeah. Wow.
Well, he was all in those war movies, being from Brooklyn and Ruth.
That's right. Yeah, he was. That's
Yeah.
right. He was the token Brooklyn guy in all the platoons of World War II.
And even Lifeboat, the Hitchcock movie Lifeboat.
Yeah, that's
where
right.
He starts getting delirious and starts talking about the Dodgers should start Wyatt or Higby or whatever, in 1941 or 2.
Actually, that was a pretty good movie.
Oh, Lifeboat, yeah.
Yeah.
No, that's Hitchcock now. There's one.
And it was all filmed
set
on the back lot there where they have that big pool.
Yeah, well, one set movie.
Yep.
But that was nothing like him playing Babe Ruth. I mean, that was just,
I know.
Can't describe how bad it was.
Well, the roll calls for a big, stocky guy, so that.
Yeah, I know. Yeah.
And so anybody who's just big, like John Goodman, gets the part. But he's not. There was something on last night I was watching, and it was Gary Cooper in a wartime movie where he's pitching to one of these other. He's in the house and he's pitching a baseball, an imaginary baseball. I think, and he was he looked awful in his attempt to be a pitcher. It was one of these wartime feel-good movies that he made.
Well, and Steve, I guess you're going to talk also. When Babe was a pitcher, with the Red Sox, he was on the thin side. He was, a young, very strong athlete. He didn't get heavy until later in his career. And so anybody does it.
Part about people like Bendix being cast in the role, right? Because it makes much more sense to get somebody who's in terrific shape who can play the young Ruth, and then you just put a fat suit on him for a couple of scenes.
I agree with you, Steve. That was my point. Is that Babe, his transition, like all of us. You get heavier as you get older, but to portray, use a William Bendix or a Goodman to talk about Babe Ruth and show him as a big portly guy. That's only part of the story. That's not the way he was when he was a young man.
No, in fact, just the other night on TV they had some silent movies, of course, of Ruth warming up as a pitcher for the Red Sox, and he was very slim and very trim, and but the public image of Ruth is this big, stocky, jovial guy.
Yeah, exactly.
And he was a pretty good pitcher, wasn't he?
Oh, he was
a good pitcher, wasn't he?
Oh, yeah.
Good pitcher.
Yeah, he would have made the Hall of Fame as a pitcher, assuming his arm never went.
Right.
Yeah, he didn't he hold some record of a World Series pitcher?
Yeah, that's the one Whitey Ford broke for
right.
Scoreless innings. Yeah,
that's right.
And there was I think the first or second game of 1916. The game went 14 innings, and he pitched the whole game and won it 2-1.
Yeah.
Yeah, they didn't worry about it.
He led the league in earned run average in 1916, and I think he was a 20-game winner in both 1916 and 1917.
Yeah, he was, Alan. He was a 20-game winner twice, and I think he won. Well, he won 96 or something like that.
94 and 46. Yeah.
Yeah, and he only pitched like 5-6 years.
1918 was the year he began the transition.
Right.
Yeah, he had 11 home runs that year, and then the full transition came in his last year with Boston, where he hit 29 home runs, which is the record at that point.
Right.
Which almost doubled the next year.
I don't think he ever pitched for the Yankees.
He pitched 5 games. Basically, and won them all. Basically, late season gimmicks.
Oh.
Yeah, he never started a game for the Yankees that meant anything.
Okay.
It was a gimmick.
I have a trivia question, a Babe Ruth trivia question. He was sold to New York by Boston to finance. The money went to finance a Broadway show.
No, that's a mythology.
That's not true.
None of that went on about 6 years later. But it did go to finance Broadway shows that Frazee was producing.
Yeah.
We had Sabre had the convention in Boston in 2002, and there were a couple of Frazee apologists. And, I told people, I said, all you have to do is look at it, and when Frazee bought the team, they were a world champion in first place for most of the time. When he left the team, they were the laughing stock of the American League. That says it all to me.
I'd have a bridge to sell to one of those.
Yeah. But they tagged it to his show No Nanette, but it turned out that it was not true.
Then I learned something. I thought I was going to be the trivia questionnaire, and the question wasn't true. So, as usual, I get to learn from you guys.
There were about half a dozen players on the 1918 Red Sox who won the World Series that were on the Yankees in 1923 when they won their first, and Babe Ruth was one of them.
Oh, hey, I also want to mention a Detroit manager, a former Yankee star. You mentioned Babe was at least not, if not offered the job, offered to talk to the guy. Red Rolfe managed Detroit. Wonder how that happened that he never became a Yankee manager, that he went to Detroit.
Because they weren't going to fire Casey. They just hired Casey Stengel, who was very tied heavily into George Weiss, who had become the general manager. And Weiss got rid of Bucky Harris because Bucky Harris was Lee McPhail's choice. They brought Stengel in from Oakland, and Stengel was fairly successful there for the Yankees, to say the least.
He was pretty successful. You're right.
Yeah.
I'd say so.
Especially, again, I have to mention those first 5 years.
Yeah, and he didn't carry a 500-pound notebook with all sorts of graphs and numbers in there to do what he did.
It was all in his head.
Yeah.
Okay. Hey, thanks, guys. Terrific show.
This was a great show.
Thank you, Steve Goldleaf. Thank you, Ronnie Rabinovich.
Steve, thank you. You bet.
Thank you, David Hubler.
Yep, thanks. Thank you.
Thank you, Alan Blumkin.
Thank you.
And, of course, thank you, George Case.
My pleasure. I enjoyed this. And, Steve, maybe we can have you back on again. We can talk more about this. This is quite an enlightening conversation about Babe Ruth.
Yeah, I'd love to.
Yeah. Beautiful.
Great.
If you're listening out there, this is a chance for me to do and say something that I sometimes forget to say at the end of a podcast. Besides George Case's commercial, we'll get that in a minute. But if you would box up, if you're listening out there, box up some new or lightly used children's books and get them to the Head Start program in whatever community you live. These kids need help in developing an imagination. Books do that. Getting your nose out of the computer and the device, books do that. You learn to be school ready. You learn to develop a passion. Get kids reading and get some books. Get a neighborhood drive going. It would really make me happy. And I'll have George talk about the product that I am so proud to sponsor on the Comfortably Zoned Radio Network, George Case.
Well, thank you, Ralph. Yeah, the DVD, it's called Ballfield to Battlefield and Back, from FDR to JFK, and it's a color 60-minute DVD featuring footage of my dad and Mickey Vernon and their comments. And today we talked really about Babe and Babe Ruth in the 20s and early 30s. Our DVD is really from 1939 on. So it's all in color. And any baseball fan who wants to take a look back at the way it used to be with many, many Major League Hall of Famers and ball players who gave up their careers at that point, served their country, then came back to baseball. That's what the DVD is all about. At the holiday season, it's a wonderful gift for anyone who's looking for a very unusual and unique baseball gift for the fan. And we're offering a 10% discount. The DVD is $29.95. And anybody who's interested in purchasing it, all they have to do is contact me. My email address is case67@verizon.net, and we'll handle it from there. So thank you very much.
George, they can go directly to the website and hop on there. Give the website.
Yeah, the website is www.timelessbaseball.com, and you can go to the website, order it right off the website, or if you have a question, then you can ask me by email, and I'll be happy to get back to you. But I appreciate the comments, Ralph, and enjoyed it with Steve and our panelists today, and look forward to doing it again. Thank you.
As usual, this was a terrific one. Thanks for you being George Case. Be well, everybody. Thank you for listening.
Yep. Bye-bye now.
Bye-bye.
So long.
The proceeding was a Comfortably Zoned Radio Network production. Thank you for listening.